So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online and in-person program titled Acquisition Notes, Building Rare Book and Manuscript Collections at the UC Davis Library. Tonight's event is co-presented and co-hosted by the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America's Northern California chapter. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and get this program started. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition finely made books. We have a scholarly journal called the Quarterly Newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members and guests. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining or rejoining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to go online to bccbooks.org to find out more about the book club, to join, or to donate. And now for tonight's program. I'm going to ask Kate Midas, the Vice Chair of the Northern California chapter of the ABAA, to take the podium for some remarks and to introduce our speaker. But first, in terms of some logistics, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can use the chat or the Q&A if you have questions or comments for our presenter. We should have time towards the end of the hour to have a conversation, and we'll take questions and comments from the chat and the Q&A on Zoom, and from you here in the club rooms. And now it's officially my time to welcome Kate Midas, the Vice Chair of the Northern California chapter of the ABAA.
Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Kevin, for joining us. Kevin Miller leads the Archives and Special Collections Department at the UC Davis Library, where he has worked for nearly a decade. He holds a PhD in ethnomusicology and a master's degree in library and information studies, both from UCLA. Today, he's going to discuss the library's approach to building rare book and manuscript collections that support its educational mission and meet the needs of the researching public. Taking actual acquisitions as examples, he'll take us on a tour through the library's major collecting areas by subject and explore the various pathways books and other materials take en route to the library's shelves. And for all the booksellers in the audience, he'll teach us how to sell to them. So, take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kevin, the other Kevin. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. It's an honor to speak at the Book Club of California. Thank you to the Northern Branch for the sponsorship. As Kate mentioned, I'm Kevin. I'm the head of Archives and Special Collections at UC Davis Library. I've been in that position about 7 years. I started at UC Davis as the university archivist, so very focused on faculty and their papers, and also UC Davis units in terms of bringing in records and so on. My background is in academic archives, and before that, as Kate mentioned, I'm also a secret ethnomusicologist. If you want to ask me about that later, I'll go right ahead. So my talk tonight is kind of semi-formal. I'm going to kind of walk you through what it is I do in my job as head of Archives and Special Collections in terms of the acquisition of rare books and other material, manuscript collections, why we collect that material, the thought process behind it, what we do with that material. My talk is geared partly at booksellers, but also partly at anybody interested in rare books. So I hope that everybody will have something to take from my presentation. You know, whether it's hitting me up by email with a book offer or coming by our reading room to see one of our tomes. And greetings to those online as well. before moving on from my title slide, I needed something to kind of go in that space. And so I brought up the UC Davis seal, but every once in a while I'm reminded, hey, there's an open book at the center of this seal, right? And it's not just UC Davis, it's all of the University of California. And it's something that we kind of take for granted now, but that is, that book represents the pursuit and dissemination of knowledge. And I think it kind of shows just the resonance that books continue to have, both as actual items that deliver this information and also the symbolic quality that they have. There's a little bit of my talk that's going to be about what is the nature of a book, what is a book? And so I think that's kind of a nice place to start. So to answer the question of what and why we collect, I think it's doing that thing where
Yeah, just click on something on the computer.
Uh-huh. Trackpad. All right. It's all right.
And then the X on the taskbar side. And click the trackpad one more time.
Okay. Great. So to answer the question as to why we collect, I've got to start kind of big. You know, this is where I work. This is UC Davis. We are a very large research university in the UC system. We've got 6 professional schools, including a medical school and a law school, about 38,000 students, 4,000 some researchers and faculty. And so we are serving that community as a library and as an archives and special collections. I like this photo because it's not just campus and our, for some reason, iconic water tower, but you can kind of see beyond. So this is how I think about it. So like we start with our main constituency, the campus, the students, the faculty, and then kind of move beyond to community and anybody who's interested in accessing rare books and materials in our collections. As a land-grant university, as a public university, we are open to all archives and special collections, Monday through Friday. Everybody is welcome through our doors. Going a little further, this is kind of what I think about every day, you know, maybe in the back of my mind, you know, when I'm considering whether to acquire a book, whether it's a donation or a purchase, I'm thinking about what we do as a university and how this will support that. So for example, you may know we're ranked first in the nation in terms of agriculture and also forestry. We are an ag school, right? But also by some accounts ranked first in the nation in veterinary medicine. So one of those schools is the School of Veterinary Medicine, a very important school. And then also ranked first in other areas in terms of sustainability, ranked first in terms of diversity and inclusiveness and internationalism. So these are all things that I kind of take into account when I think about building our collections. Focusing now more on where I work, the Archives and Special Collections in the UC Davis Library. We're located in Shields Library on the main campus. We have upwards of 250,000 rare books or so, about 25,000 linear feet of manuscripts and archives. We hold a mission to hold scarce and irreplaceable historical materials in trust for the benefit of the University of California and the public, and for the international scholarly community. So acquisitions is really just kind of the first step, right? So once we bring in an item, these are kind of the things we have in place to support its use. Because for me, if we acquire a rare book and it's never in the hands of an interested student or a scholar, then my mission is incomplete. So we have our reading room, again, open to the public. This is admittedly a pretty busy day, I'm not gonna lie. So that's a reading room. I also want to mention that we do a lot of remote services, and we do a lot of services through interlibrary loan. We actually will loan out some rare material to other special collections in the UC system, as long as it's accessed in a reading room and special collections. But more frequently, we work with our interlibrary loan to digitize material on demand if I deem that it is suitable for that in terms of its fragility. And so we actually disseminate a lot through the interlibrary loan program and through digitization. central to my heart as well as our instruction program. And so you see Christine there is working with a student. She heads our instruction program, and that's specific for archives and special collections. So again, if we collect all this material and nobody ever sees it or knows we have it, then it's lost, right? So we put this material in front of undergraduates by working with faculty members to bring their classes right to our department. And so we have a little classroom right in the middle of the department, and we bring classes in on a regular basis to expose them to primary sources and rare books and show them how to do original research with this material. And then finally, we have our Harrison Preservation Lab. That's on the 4th floor of the library, and that's Jennifer working with some materials. So again, to make sure that people can continue to access and use this material, we do have a conservationist in place now and a preservation program. So these are some of the facilities that support the work that we do. All right. So as I said, this is a talk about acquisition stories, right? So how things come to us and the path that they take. So I thought I'd start with one of our origin stories. And unfortunately, it may not be wise because it's probably better than any story that I actually experienced myself during my tenure, but just going to put it out front anyway. So way back in 1958, we were just about to become a general campus in the UC system, having been the University Farm and then the College of Agriculture for Berkeley. We were going to open officially as a special collections about a decade later in 1966, but we were already building rare book collections. So there was a major windfall. So the story involves a death in England, this tome, and America's pastime, baseball, right? Okay, so stay with me. So the death in England is C.K. Ogden, who was a book collector. It was reported that he owned 3 houses just to kind of maintain his collection and show it off. And when he passed away, down at UCLA, Lawrence Clark Powell managed to secure this massive book collection for the University of California. So Davis ended up getting about 10,000 books from this collection. It was a major start to our collection. But there was one gem among this donation, a second folio of Shakespeare's 1632. I think you all know just how valuable that is.
What year is this when this act?
1958, yes. But the question was which campus in the UC system was going to get the second folio. So Berkeley were set with Shakespeare. UCLA was pretty much set with Shakespeare. But some of the newer campuses, Riverside, Davis, Santa Barbara, were all kind of jousting for it. So it's just how to decide. So at the time, our director was this man, Richard Blanchard. And, they all got together and they're like, let me just put it in his words. This is from his memoir. He says years later, not wishing to decide the placing of the volume by such a bourgeois action as the flipping of a coin, it was decided to base placement on the outcome of the World Series. Davis was fortunate in drawing the New York Yankees, who knocked in the winning run of the 1958 baseball series, which also meant the second folio was pitched out to the Davis campus. All right. So yes, we got our second folio of Shakespeare based on a wager on the 1958 World Series. I thought this was the perfect way to launch this talk, which is about journeys that rare books take and the materials that we collect and route to our shelves. Again, I don't know if I can top that story, but before we leave the past completely, being a good archivist in preparation for this talk, I thought I'd dig into our own archives and kind of see what some of my predecessors were doing in terms of rare book collecting. We kept a lot of these records. We, of course, have our own library archival series. And so I came across this letter, which I thought was interesting. That you probably can't read it, but it's from a Rosenthal, which is in England, in London. And she's writing to one of my predecessors about a work in Latin, early printed book from 1485. And what caught my eye was that it was from the library of Andre Simon. He was a wine merchant and book collector. If you don't know, I'm going to be getting to this, but we do a lot with grapes and wine, if you didn't know. And so it's always a treat to get something from Andre Simon's collection. And so this is way back in 1982. So partly I wanted to share this because it was kind of a cool item, but partly I kind of wanted to show how things change, but things also stay the same, right? This is, back then it was snail mail and international phone calls, but this could easily be an email that I got last week with a link to an online catalog, right? So we did end up purchasing the item. I went and sought it out from our shelves, as described in the card here, in the letter. It is bound in modern boards using part of this early manuscript, early printed item, which is what you see here. It does have the book plate from the Simone Library. This was basically in Latin for householders. And it did include a passage on the proper use of wine, which was why we acquired it. 285 pounds, about $500 US. Not too bad.
This is an Incanavia, right?
Yes, that's right. All right. So moving on, more to the present day. So just talking a little bit about our acquisitions process, kind of pull the curtain back just a little bit. We're a pretty small group in the library and in archives and special collections. We work on acquisitions pretty collectively. Some of you who are booksellers may know some of my colleagues, like Sarah Gunasekara, who reaches out a lot. We don't really have any subject specialization at this point outside of food and wine, and many of you may be working with Dr. Audrey Russick, who is building our food and wine collections now. Some of you may have worked with some of our former librarians like John Sherlock or Axel Borg, Dan Goldstein, now retired. Giants in our field and in our library who helped to build our collections that we have today. So we do tend to work with online catalogs and email correspondence. We go to book fairs when we can, sometimes virtual book fairs and as well, live fairs. I won't say too much about our budget, except that I wish it were larger. We rely increasingly on philanthropic support in terms of building out our rare book collections. We have endowments that pay out every year that we can use to build these collections, but it does mean that it is absolutely a zero-sum game. We have to pick very carefully throughout the year. So if we seem kind of conservative in the fall, we might be a little more open in the winter quarter and maybe even more open in spring, unless we've spent all of our money by then, which is definitely possible. Let's see. So I'll be talking a lot about our collecting areas and research strengths, where we really have our collection development policies and where we focus a lot of our acquisitions. But in addition to that, we'll also make acquisitions if we feel like it has a direct impact on instruction in our department. So there's often an overlap between our subjects' expertise, or rather strengths, and instruction. But sometimes if there's an item that's being offered that we think will have a lot of utility in our classroom, then we will get it. And so Christine Chang, again, is the person I collaborate with that on making those decisions. Wanted to mention that just as an aside, when the pandemic hit, you might think that these activities slowed down, but actually they kind of accelerated because we found ourselves working from home with a lot of time on our hands in some ways. And so more time to look at catalogs that were still being offered, more time to work with booksellers. But the only problem was that our mailroom on campus, and the library was closed. There was nobody at the library. I was one of the only people that was going to the library every week just to kind of check the stacks, make sure there weren't any leaks or anything out of the ordinary in our secured stacks. But it was a graveyard. There was nobody there. So I was having books sent directly to my house from booksellers and sign on delivery. And but it was still a little nerve-wracking to have a $10,000 item or so kind of show up at my house and like sit on our guest bed in the guest bedroom for a few days, and these would pile up. And this is actually a photo of me bringing in a haul from home back to the library. So anyway, that first summer and fall and spring and summer of the pandemic, it was like that. We quickly got back to business as usual. Just a little bit throughout my talk, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we acquired items. Again, those pathways to our shelves. And so as you might expect, that tends to come in the form of donations, what we call a gift in kind. We rely as a special collections very heavily on donations, particularly for manuscript collections. And then of course, purchases from rare book dealers or vendors. We also, although not nearly as often, might make purchases directly from creators. This happens sometimes with book arts or artist books, which I'll be talking about, where we might buy directly from an artist. And there's a couple other examples I'll be talking about. And then in a best case scenario, we might work with a foundation or an organization that provides grants for the acquisition of rare books. Unfortunately, these are fewer and fewer, but I will be talking about one that we made in the last couple of years. All right, so this is an overview of our collecting strengths at UC Davis and at the library and in archives and special collections. In some ways, it's a pretty high-level view. I'm going to be going through these one by one. So I'll show you some examples and some stories from these areas. But just to run through it briefly now, arts and humanities, especially writing and nature, writing in the environment, of course, agriculture and food sciences. We do a lot on campus with entomology, especially apiculture and the study of honeybees. Animal science, again, supporting that veterinary medicine school. Histories of underrepresented groups in California. So we want to record and collect the histories of all Californians. And then regional focus is very strong for us, starting with Davis and kind of radiating out into the Central Valley. We do claim a lot of the Bay Area when Berkeley's not doing it, depending on the subject. This, political movements and issues. We have some collections that collect from both sides of the political extreme. And then, of course, university history. All right, so let's get into this. Starting with the arts and humanities. So, of course, from the Ogden purchase and several other large book purchases made early on, we have a very strong foundation in the humanities, like most special collections. And we do continue to collect broadly in the humanities to support research and education. But when it comes down to it, these are the areas that we've kind of focused most strongly on. So starting with environmental writing. So our flagship collection here is the Gary Snyder papers. So Gary Snyder, if you don't know, is a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. He was part of what's sometimes called the San Francisco Renaissance. He was contemporaries of Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac. He was part of that group that came out of San Francisco. He's well known for his poetry and his writing that intersects the environment and poetry. So we do have his papers, and those were partly purchased over several decades, partly donated. I wanted to mention here an acquisition that we made a few years ago, which was from one of Gary's friends. Gary, by the way, is 95 years old and still with us, living out there on the San Juan Ridge at his home that he calls Kitkitzi. So this was a donation. Oh, and by the way, that sort of sticker over there, I'm going to be using those to kind of show you whether it was a donation or whether we got it from a bookseller and that sort of thing. So that's what that is. So this was a set of 35mm negatives, like envelopes of them from 1970. One of Gary's friends filmed him and on this group of people building his kind of iconic home out there on the San Juan Ridge, Kikitizi. So this is where he's lived ever since 1970. And so kind of almost out of nowhere, his friends show up with these photographs. And so they did donate them, but on the condition that we digitize them and share that with them, which we were happy to do. So we do get a lot through donations, and sometimes there's a catch, but if we can do it, then we'll follow through. Happy to do it here because you know, we're all Gary Snyder all the time in terms of his papers. It's one of our most popular and sought after collections. But anyway, this is Gary in the construction hat with the nails in his mouth, standing on the roof of his future home from one of those photos. Just wanted to share that with you. Beyond that, we still collect a lot in general with poetry, especially regional poetry to this part of California, British poetry, British women's poetry, avant-garde poetry. We have a collecting area in alternative theater and avant-garde theater, especially in the 20th century. So we have the San Francisco Mime Troupe papers, for example, the Living Theater. This was especially a collecting area, you know, decades ago, but it's still an area that we try to build out. Typically that's through donations, but we're always on the lookout for material related to those groups. Moving on to agriculture and food sciences. I'm going to actually spend a lot of time here because this is one of our major collecting areas. So we have a huge collection starting at the top on agricultural technology. So what that means is tractor repair manuals. It's just to kind of simplify it for you. But seriously, we have a lot of that sort of thing that documents the history of agricultural machinery going way back. And so that's an area that we're always looking to build out. Wine and grapes, viticulture and enology remains a huge area for us. Hugh Johnson, the wine writer, once said that UC Davis is the greatest wine library in the world. And so we repeat that quite often. And we do try very hard to build out any aspect having to do with grapes and wine, from the science to the culture to the history. And as I mentioned, we have Dr. Audrey Russick now, who's our curator for food and wine. And so she spends her time focusing on this. Let's see. But not just wine, right? We're also focusing on other food sciences and also other beverages. And this happens a lot with partnerships around the UC Davis campus with centers that have come up in these areas. That includes the relatively new UC Davis Coffee Center. We're trying to build out resources having to do with coffee a lot right now with great success. But also the Global Tea Institute, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. The brewing program at UC Davis in terms of beer as well. We, over the last few years and continuing now, we have a strong focus on building collections related to wine writers. So these are critics and authors who write about wine and its consumption and its history. We got a lot of support here from the winemaker Warren Daniarski, who originally had Stag's Leap, one of the wines featured in the Judgment of Paris that put California wines on the map way back in 1976. So he was very generous in supporting this collecting area, which has become quite robust. So gathering papers. Again, this is mostly donations in this area. And another collecting area that I want to call out to you is the Northern California food movement. And that's what we're calling, what's sometimes called like the food revolution of California. This is coming in, it has a longer history, but it's mostly coming out of the 60s and 70s. And it's the turn toward organic farming. It's the turn toward local sourcing. It's the turn toward sustainable agriculture. It's what became later known as, farm to fork. And so it's a large umbrella of collecting areas having to do with that history, particularly as it's situated in Northern California and the influence of Northern California. And it's everything from, the people working in the fields to the chefs who are making the food. And so we've made a lot of headway in that area. And so that's also an area in terms of book vendors and booksellers where we're looking to fill any gaps if there's anything that's being offered. Another area is the Asian Culinary Heritage Collection. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And in general, we've revived our interest in cookbooks. And I know there's several other libraries, including in the UC system, that have pretty deep and broad collections in cookbooks. But we're trying to collect cookbooks that kind of inform some of these other areas in particular. We got, for example, recently Joyce Goldstein's cookbook collection, as well as her archives related to Square One and some of her other pioneering work in San Francisco, again, related to the Northern California food movement umbrella. So again, an interest in cookbooks. But moving on to some examples. We had a few years ago a temporary position, the wine writer fellow, and Julianne Ballou was in that position, and she did a fantastic job in working with the B.H. Breslau Foundation to gain a grant to make this purchase possible. This was about $38,000 that was granted to us in order to make this acquisition of an item that would normally be a bit beyond our reach. Kind of showing my hand here a little bit. But this was one of the firsts, right? And libraries love a good first. And so this translated as the debate between wine and water. And it's reported to be the first work in French that mentions wine. It's from 1515. And it was an oral tale that was written down here and then bound by a renowned binder in the early 19th century. And it was a very nice addition to our collection. So this was a case where, there's so many items that we see presented to us that we just wish we had the funds to acquire. And sometimes we'll go beyond, above and beyond to try to make it happen. And in this case, we were able to get a nice grant from the Breslau Foundation, which unfortunately, my understanding is that it is now defunct. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but unfortunately, that's no longer a resource for libraries. Moving on to another example, this is a fun one. So this is sticking with wine. This is called The Wine. It's from 2008. And this is an example of book arts, or what's sometimes called an artist book. And just kind of a sidebar on that for a second. We've been having a lot of fun building our artist book collection over the last several years. And so if you don't know, an artist book, kind of self-apparent here, is sometimes a unique creation, sometimes an item created in a limited run. This was one of 150 of this item, for example, that kind of challenges the notion of what a book is, right? It's like partly an artist creation, it's partly a book. It's an artist book. And these are especially great for the classroom. And so we tend to collect a lot of these or purchase a lot of these. Because it really gets students excited. It's also great for exhibits or bringing things out to the reading room. It's great for tours. And they're just really interesting to examine in their own right as a creative expression. So in this case, I think it's rather self-evident. So Susan Thomas is the artist, and she started with a wine cork, and she made this tiny little accordion book out of the cork of the wine bottle. And what it features is a quote from Homer's Odyssey written on these little wine labels across the center. And I'm going to read that quote to you. The wine urges me on, the bewitching wine, which sets even a wise man to singing and to laughing gently, and brings forth words which were better unspoken. So moving from wine to tea, I mentioned that we partner pretty closely now with the Global Tea Institute for the Study of Tea Culture and Science, which is at UC Davis. It's headed by Catherine Burnett. So we are collecting more and more in the area of tea. In this case, we were helped along the way by a good friend of the library, Daryl Cordy, who purchased this book from a rare bookseller with the intention of donating it to the library. So that's why there's an asterisk next to donor. So it was a donation, but it was a donor who worked directly with the bookseller who acquired it purposefully for the purpose of donating it to our library. And we love people like that. To support this focus on tea and tea cultivation at the university, we are trying to build this collection for the Global Tea Institute, which we hold in archives and special collections. So this particular work is a very recent acquisition. And you can see here it's from Japan. And it translates as Tying the Tea Caddy Silk Storage Bag. It's from 1801. And what I really like about it is that it's very visual. And so each page has a design here of these different ways of tying a knot for what is this tea caddy, which is essentially a bag or a package full of tea. And it was a really important part of the Japanese tea ceremony, part of the ritual. And this book basically just demonstrates multiple types of knots in these beautiful illustrations. And here's just a couple more, sort of a better look. Obviously, the paper is very translucent, so what you're seeing is partly coming through from the other side. But there's actually a story behind these knots as well, which I think makes the book even more interesting. Can anybody guess why this culture of unique knots might have arisen with these types of tea caddies? What's that? Security. That's exactly right. In particular, the samurai or the noble persons who had a particular tea caddy would develop their own unique knot. And so they would know if it was untied and retied, and if there were potentially poisonous leaves added to the tea, they would know if it had been tampered with, because their unique knots would have been disturbed, right? And so that's the legend / history behind these different knots. And that one looks like a bird, in case you hadn't noticed. Yeah. So I love this acquisition. Sticking with food and wine. So our collection related to Asian and particularly Chinese culinary traditions is really growing right now. We got a really great start on it way back in 1991 with the acquisition of two collections from independent collectors of English language Chinese cookbooks, the Gardner Pond and Peter Hertzman collections. And so building on that, we, of course, make acquisitions from booksellers as well, including this item, Chinese Cookery in the Home Kitchen. So this is the first edition of the first English language Chinese cookbook published in America. So 1911, it was written by Jessie Louise Knowlton, who is probably not Chinese. She was a Chicago area women's health and beauty newspaper columnist. And so she published this book, which is the first English language Chinese cookbook in the US. So that was a very nice acquisition. And then we also had a windfall with Chef Martin Yan, who, if you don't know, he's a celebrity chef who made his name on PBS in the 80s and 90s with Yan Can Cook, a Chinese cooking show, Chinese food cooking show on PBS. His slogan was, "If Yan can cook, so can you," right? And he's also an alumnus of UC Davis. And so we worked with him over the last 5 years on acquiring both his papers and business records, but also his cookbook collection, which we do now have and is fully cataloged. What you see here is actually a photograph of a framed image on the wall adjacent to all of these cookbooks in Shields Library as a dedication. There was over 3,000 or nearly 3,000 cookbooks from his collection. So we've greatly expanded our area and our collecting in this area in the last few years. All right, so we're moving on from agriculture and food science, although this is somewhat related. I mentioned there's a very strong collecting focus library-wide on resources having to do with honeybees and also nematodes. So if you have a rare book on nematodes, I would love to see it. So, the gauntlet is thrown. That's your challenge. Come back to me with your rare book on nematodes. But we do collect a lot in this area. I think compared to some other classes, especially in wine and in agriculture, we've had some challenge kind of connecting these resources with classes. And it's a history of science, really. And so it really just depends on the curricula that are being explored by faculty and what the student assignments are and what the student projects are. That's true really for any area in special collections. But we do try to support the history of the science through a very robust collection having to do with honeybees. And there's just one example. We acquired that quite some time ago, but just as an example. And as I mentioned, we have a very prominent School of Veterinary Science. And so we do try to support that program. Again, it's a little hard to see, what our impact is on that program, which of course is heavily focused on modern and contemporary science approaches. But we do try to fill in that historical story in terms of the history of science. Moving on to the collecting from the history of underrepresented people in California, and this area is very broad because we really do want to collect all stories having to do with Californians. And again, the regional focus kind of comes into play. We look at all of these areas, but anything having to do with Davis, has the most precedence for us and the most importance. And then we kind of radiate out. And again, we also collect a lot, for example, here having to do with Japanese incarceration, because it comes up in classes a lot. And so having that material, even if it's not super regional, is very important to us. So those areas include Native American histories and cultures, African American history in California and the West, Asian American history in California, but also material related to women's studies and women's histories, and LGBTQ plus histories as well. These are areas where we buy a lot from vendors. I'll just tell you, there's a lot that we're doing with booksellers in this area, or at least are trying to. The example that I've pulled out here, of course, has to do with Japanese American history. This is simply called Baseball from the Tule Lake Relocation Center, way up near the Oregon border. So this does have to do with Japanese internment or Japanese incarceration during World War II, which of course, with 125,000 or so people of Japanese ancestry were put into these camps after the attack on Pearl Harbor. I think what we try to do with our material is to document that history, but also kind of show maybe the unexpected and resilient aspects of life in the camps. And this is an example of that. Baseball. Again, it sounds like this talk is suddenly about baseball, right? First we have the World Series, and here it is again. Baseball was incredibly important to Japanese Americans through the 30s, right up, through the war. There were clubs all over Sacramento where Japanese neighborhoods and groups would have teams and play each other. And they continued that in the camps. And this is a pretty rare book of statistics from 1944 out of the Tule Lake Center way up north. But it actually comments on all the different incarceration sites and the baseball teams that are there. It's got these hand-drawn illustrations. It's got information about players, about teams and how they performed. There was a New York Times article about the importance of baseball to Japanese Americans who were in these camps. And one of the former internees said that putting on a baseball uniform was like wearing the American flag. It was just really important to them. It was like maintaining a sense of normalcy as well, right? And so, you know, an item like this is really important to kind of document that history and as a historical artifact. Here's a, you won't be able to read that very well. This item is, by the way, we did digitize it and it's available in our digital collections. But this is talking a little bit about Manzanar and just how they're doing that season. It really reads like any other sort of local youth baseball, amateur baseball kind of stats book, you know, and that sort of normalcy I think is really telling. But it does sort of, you know, casually mention that, you know, like the Manzanar players are former Southern Californians. So, you know, if you can read between the lines, you can tell that this is a very special publication from a very troubling time. So sort of staying in this area, here's a couple other acquisitions that we got from Booksellers. So the Pullman Saloon photograph, technically it's not California, it is Nevada, but you know, we do generally collect in the West and all the trails that we're leading out to California. This is an example of a Black-owned business very early on. 1905 is the date associated with this photograph. These kinds of group photographs of especially Black-owned businesses are very rare from that period. Plus, I just love this photograph. I feel like if you were a novelist, you could write, you know, a story about every face in this photograph because it's so charming and so expressive. I just love that they put the dog on a chair in the center. There's a couple dogs in the photo. If you look closely, the children are there.
The dog maybe owns the saloon.
Yeah, actually, we know the owner of the saloon, and he was on the local baseball team. I'm not making that. Several of these guys were on the baseball team.
The dog is a mascot.
The dog could be the mascot, yeah. And then we do have a green book, a guide for African-American travelers who are moving around the country in the Jim Crow South and also the mid 20th century. This was something I included it here. We'd had it for quite some time, but we resurfaced it after the movie came out in 2018. Green Book, you might remember, was a film that got a lot of critical acclaim and a lot of awards. And so we kind of leveraged that attention to kind of say, hey, do you want to come see a real Green Book? We have one here in Archives and Special Collections. Okay. I'm probably going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. I've been telling too many stories. So I'll move toward wrapping up as well. So we do collect from Central Valley, California, and the American West. We have the Harrison Research, the Western Research Center, established in 2005, which is part of our Archives and Special Collections. The emphasis is on regional California history. We purchase things like the stock directory or what's known as a brand book, typically. Tells a lot of interesting history about local ranchers and history and ownership. In addition to the brands, you've got the ear clippings, which I think is what those symbols mean. It's how ears were clipped to identify ownership among the cattle. I also wanted to mention that we bought this book in honor of Dan Goldstein's retirement. Again, he was one of our librarians who did a lot of collecting in this area. We worked with him to identify a lot of things like this, and he did retire in 2023. So we bought this book in his honor to hold in the library. And this is us just kind of having a little surprise celebration for him. One of my favorite recent acquisitions, and I haven't been mentioning particular booksellers, I hope you don't mind, it's just to kind of, but you know who you are, right? So this was one of my favorite recent acquisitions. This was one where we really kind of looked under the cushions to find that change because we really wanted it. It's a fantastic collection of photographs from a San Francisco-based photographer named Howard Clinton Tibbetts. You may be familiar. He worked for Sunset Magazine, and so he was trying to depict the West and California in particular as you know, beyond the Wild West, kind of showing what we have to offer. And these fantastic photographs from about 1903 sorry, 1908, showing very early California in the 20th century, including Calistoga. And what I want to point out here is like what the tipping point for us with this was like three things. It was the depth of the history, 1908 being pretty early for photography, the clarity and quality of the photographs, and also the artistic quality of the photographs, and then also the subject matter, of course. It intersected with so many of our collecting areas. We just couldn't pass on it. So regional history and regional tourism is one of our areas. This is a Beaulieu Vineyard, a BV, pre-prohibition. And we had just acquired the records from BV as a donation. And so this was a really nice intersection to complement the material they were giving us. Kind of a zoom in on that one. Again, just the detail in these photographs is really breathtaking. That artistic eye, sugar beets, again, the intersection with agriculture. This is in Hayward. I love this photograph. This is the Solano, one of the train ferries they used to run, in this case, from Benicia to San Francisco. This was turned into a postcard that I've seen around, but this is one of the best photographs I've seen of a train ferry. Interior shots as well. This is in Oakland, so a little closer to home here. This is in the Signal Tower or the Interchange Tower out on the Oakland Long Pier, the Oakland Mall. And just little details. And the telephone operator seems to be missing one of his arms. And I was like, what is the story there? And then finally, going more down south in the Central Valley, this is near Yosemite. There's a lot of photographs like this, but I think his are some of the best. These are troops lined up with one of the fallen trees in Mariposa.
Is it otherwise collected anywhere else?
His
Yeah.
his work is scattered around in different institutions.
Has it been monographed?
I'm not absolutely sure, but love his work. All right, so we're almost through with the collecting areas. But I mentioned we do collect on the political right and the political left. And this is also an area where we do a lot of work with booksellers. So radical left groups, including socialist, communist groups, the American Old Left and New Left, the far right, especially in the 20th century, and related fine press and artist books. This is not exactly far left, but it's political, right?
Oh, it's
So-
a very, very flattering portrait of Reagan.
I think he kept caricature artists in business through the 80s. And then this is on the other side, a little more far right, a book about the secret inside story behind welfare abuse. And we could spend the rest of the talk unpacking this cover if we wanted to, but it's a lot. Finally, university history. So this is an area where, as you'd imagine, we mostly rely on transfers from other UC units. We rely on donations from university faculty. But every once in a while, there might be something that a vendor has that's relevant to Davis history. So please let us know. And in this case, I was able to work directly with a photographer, a professional photographer who is also an alumnus. His name is Francisco Dominguez. He's Sacramento-based. He shot for the Third World Forum, which was the alternative student newspaper on campus. So we have some of his work related to campus history that we purchased from him directly. We've made 3 purchases from him now at this point. And it's everything from, faculty members, like one of the founders of our Native American Studies program, Jack Forbes. We also have Jack Forbes papers. So again, looking for those intersections to materials that we already have. We don't turn our eyes away from our own history. This is the Occupy movement in 2011, the infamous pepper spray incident at UC Davis. This is Francisco's photograph of a student protester being dragged away by campus police. He's also got some of the iconic pepper spray photographs as well. And then a little more recently, toward the end of the Schwarzenegger administration in California, this was part of the effort to pass the California Dream Act. So some UC Davis students over in Sacramento protesting, I think, his vetoes. All right. So just to kind of wrap things up, again, I just wanted to list this out for your convenience, our major collecting areas. I do hope that if you're a book vendor, we'll continue to talk. And if you are just interested in rare books, we'll see you in our reading room over in Davis. We're right off 80. If you're going anywhere north of Davis, stop by and see us. We're open Monday through Friday. And there's a few points I wanted to mention in wrapping up. First is really an appreciation for booksellers. You know, I mentioned that we don't have a lot of money to throw around, but when we can connect with you on something that we can afford, or it's just great. It's a great partnership. We really respect all the work and research that you do on this material. In fact, we know that that's sometimes half the value. It's definitely part of the value. It's a huge part of the value, because if we don't know what something is, then we're not going to be able to connect any users to it. They're not going to be able to find it. We're not going to be able to explain its meaning. So we really appreciate your work. And we do incorporate your vendor descriptions into the catalog. So that work does, have a second life in our catalog. The second thing, and maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A if you're interested, but I wanted to work this into the talk somehow. We do live in a digital age. I mentioned that some of this we've digitized and put online. But when we're deciding whether or not to acquire a rare book, we do the bibliographic checking. Okay, so we see, of course, do we already have it? That's the first question. Do the other UCs have it? Is another question. I mentioned all the interlibrary loan. Do some of our regional partners, the State Library, Sacramento Center for History, do they have it? Does Berkeley have it? Does Stanford have it? And, it's depending on the item, that's what kind of goes into our decision, But we also, do look to see if it's been digitized and made available online. And that's not a deal breaker for us. It's just part of the question. And I think it's a really interesting philosophical question. It's probably one you think about a lot. It's like, just because something is online, and that's, of course, happening more than ever now with the Google Book Digitization Project, anything that's out of copyright or in the public domain is increasingly available online. It goes into our decision, but only so far, because really what that is getting the user is the information, right? It's getting the user the content, but it doesn't get the user the experience of kind of holding the book, being with the book, studying the book as an object, in terms of watermarks, in terms of smells, in terms of, other physicalities of the book. It doesn't get them the aura of the book, and that's something we talk about, and I think it's true. There's something about being in the presence of a work from 1632 that you can't replicate online. And so there's still an incredible value to having this material in our library. And so, we bring them out for classes, we bring them out for researchers, and students really light up when they get to be this close to a part of history. So that's really important to me. And then I am finally going to wrap up with a little bit of a plug. Did I push the wrong button? I think I did. And it's for another talk. So at UC Davis, we're starting what I hope is a series of talks related to archives and special collections that features a scholar who has done work in our archives, in our reading room, and they're talking about their work and how they use the resources. And in this case, it's Janet Gedansis, who did work with our Pierce family collection, which is one of the Sudler families whose land UC Davis sprang up on. And it's about female proprietors in the Lake Tahoe area who were early business owners of some of the pioneering or very early resorts out in Tahoe. And so she did work in our reading room, and so she's going to come give a talk on October 9th, excuse me, at 5:30. It's free, so if you're in the Davis area, please stop by and attend. This is important to us because we want to kind of show the impact that these collections have on scholarship. We want to show how scholars are using our material. And it's just, it's just going to be a cool talk about cool history. So it's something we hope to do at a minimum on maybe an annual basis. But we'll just have to see. So with that, I really am going to wrap it up. And thank you for your time and attention. I hope it's been interesting.
quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have time for questions, and we'll take some from here in the club rooms, and I have a couple on Zoom as well.
Just-
Stephen, we'll go first.
Yeah, just, has the recent Trump attack on universities affected special collections at universities? In the budget?
It has. We've, you know, the budgets across the UCs are tightening up and moving into kind of a conservative stance because we don't know what's coming. And there was also issues with the state budget where we're having to kind of work with less. So it's had some impact on staffing levels. It may eventually have some impact on our collections budgets. So there is an impact there. I wouldn't say it's really impacting our mission, which we will continue to fulfill. But it will have real world impacts on our ability to do that in terms of resources.
John?
UC has, not surprisingly, but it's a major art department,
Yes.
going all the way from artisans and Wayne Tebow and the like. Now, is that in any sense accommodated? Or you have, I mean, there are lots of venues, like the papers are mostly with the Smithsonian, all sorts of things. But, or is that impelled in the art department?
Yeah, we do have a lot. And the question was about art archives related to UC Davis's history in the funk art movement and other regional art movements. Yeah. So we do have a fair amount of that in our archives and special collections. I'd like to get more. We have a lot about the history of the art department and the art department records. The library itself, Shields Library, has a hanging faculty art collection, which is pretty significant. We're currently working with the Minetti Shrem of Art at UC Davis to help us maintain and curate that collection. But if you're ever in, again, another great reason to visit the library is we have, you know, some works by Tebow and his contemporaries from UC Davis, from Robert Arneson, hanging in the library. We have our famous eggheads from Arneson, which are iconic and all over campus. One right out in front of the library, the bookhead. So his very last sculptural work. So yeah, and you know, we're constantly working to try to get more papers from faculty artists, especially from that period. As you mentioned, some of them have gone to the Smithsonian appropriately, but it's an area that we'd like to build out. Sure.
Another question, Mary Ellen?
I've talked to Audrey. I have a major collection of regional food and wine
Mm-hmm.
that I've talked about donating, but I am going to ask the question, why you versus the California State Library, the Sacramento Room, Center for Sacramento History, or even Sac State have a large internment collection? So why would things go to you versus one of the others?
Well, I mean, I'll put me on the spot.
I know it's
It's not strange at all. It's the question any donor needs to ask. I think it just depends on where you want the material to be accessed and through what sort of programs and support. You know, there's something to be said for being located in Sacramento with some of these other institutions. Some of the Sac State and so on have plenty of students and a public history program that go through there. We have a very large campus and a very large undergraduate body to serve and a very robust instruction program where we do surface a lot of these collections on a regular basis to undergraduates. And that would be one of my main points of the argument. We also have a pretty robust digital collections. And so we are constantly getting material online for open access beyond the reach of Davis. And yeah, I mean, internment material, you know, I think it shouldn't really be centralized anywhere. It's a story that needs to be told, and there's many places to tell it. And so we're happy to have some of that story. You know, I think in terms of our audience, you know, it would be the infrastructure that we have set up to work with faculty and surface things for undergraduates. Yeah.
On Zoom, someone's asking in terms of the digital access and the collections, what collections can be accessed online?
Yeah, well, it's you know, there were a number of QR codes, and you either hate them or love them. But if you want to go back, and that'll get you there. You could also just Google UC Davis digital collections. We have a pretty robust in-house digitization program now. We've also worked a lot with digitization vendors to get a lot of things online. So we do sometimes focus on individual books to scan them and get them online. We also focus on larger collections, particularly photography collections, things that we think are going to get a lot of research use, things that benefit from being online in kind of a bulk or a large collection. We recently added one of our first kind of faculty papers type manuscript digital collections to our online offerings, and that's Isao Fujimoto's collection. So Isao, getting back to the Northern California food movement focus, he was a pioneering UC Davis faculty member who helped start ethnic studies, but he also was heavily involved in agriculture and labor rights. A lot of his students went on to start the Davis Farmers Market and the Davis Co-op. So his papers is kind of a flagship digital collection for that Northern California food movement focus. We have a portion of that online now, and all of the grassroots newspapers and publications that he collected about all those issues through the 60s and 70s. So that's a really great resource. One of our major photography collections that we've had online for some time is the Jervey Eastman photography collection, the Eastman Originals. So that's about 13,000 images of mostly Northern California from the mid 20th century that are online. So I could keep going, but
No,
there's quite a lot.
You can go online, it lists all the digital collections.
It does,
On the
yeah.
website.
And they're also on Calisphere, which is the California Digital Library's kind of centralized union catalog for digital collections. Yeah.
There's a very specific, we'll close with this very specific question about, there's a lot of interest in Pony Express these days, the Wells Fargo Express. Do you have any of that kind of stuff in your collection?
We do have some, but it's kind of stretching my personal knowledge to answer the question accurately. I know that we have some material, I don't think in a great amount related to the Pony Express. Sorry not to be able to answer that.
Maybe you can go online.
Detail. But that is a question you could follow up with by email, and we could provide all the details.
Great. Kate, did you want to say any closing remarks, or should we?
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. That's usually what I say. Just join me in thanking our speaker, Kevin. And thanks to the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America's Northern California chapter for co-sponsoring this presentation with us. Thank you so much. Let's do it again soon. And thanks to you for being here in person and for joining us online Zoom tonight. I hope to see you at another program soon. Thanks everyone for coming, and have a great evening.